We welcome Jake Rowe from DawgsHQ. Let's talk some dogs. We've talked some Tide already this week, but huge matchup in Atlanta in the SEC championship game. Jake, we've seen this party before. We've also seen it where Alabama was coming off a very tough win against a much worse Auburn team. And Georgia knows how that went the last time. So yeah. I imagine everybody's on high alert in Athens.
Yeah, for sure, man. And it's, Georgia's coming off an unimpressive win as well. I mean, they weren't in as much peril as Alabama was in in Auburn. But, like Kirby Smart said, he's like, hey, don't try to talk to me about the Auburn game. I've played there before.
Exactly.
So it's
this year.
Yeah. I mean, it was in a lot of ways a very similar ball game. Georgia just, was able to kind of close it out earlier in the fourth quarter and hold on defensively. But listen, I've got a lot of downright love and admiration for the way Alabama's gone about its business this year. I mean, piecing it together. I was one of the guys telling Georgia fans early this year when they lost to Texas and struggled against South Florida. I was like, man, listen, let that dirt stay in your shovel. Like, keep that dirt in the wheelbarrow. Let it sit in the pile. Don't start throwing it on Alabama because it will be wasted energy. They're going to figure it out. And lo and behold, they have. And now Georgia's got to contend with a football team that got a lot better, and Georgia did too.
How healthy is Georgia relative to last week?
I do think that they will get everybody back to an extent. Now, it's all going to depend on circumstance, right? I mean, I think Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Ra Thomas, Tate Ratledge, all four of those guys are going to give it a go. Smile Munden's a little bit banged up, but he finished last week's game. I think he's going to give it a go as well. If not, maybe play a lot. So I think all of these guys are going to be able to play. I don't think any of them are going to be 100%. You've played the game. I mean, this point in the year after 12 games at that level is nobody's 100%. But
right.
I do believe some of what happened last week was a little bit precautionary to make sure that they were ready for this week.
Well, and I keep thinking, if you go through this season with Georgia, we've really only seen a game and a half, basically, the Ole Miss game and half the Tennessee game, where there's been a Brock Bowers and a Ladd McConkey somewhat close to 100%. You still haven't seen them both 100% at the same time on the field. But that game and a half is the most dynamic Georgia offense we've seen in the Kirby Smart era.
It's the only time you've seen them on the field together, and it's really 5 quarters because I don't think Ladd played outside of the first quarter against Tennessee, played 7 snaps.
Yeah.
Neither one of them have been 100% when they've both been on the field. So that's another part too. I mean, I guess maybe Ladd was for most of that Ole Miss game.
Mm-hmm.
But Georgia's a different team with both of those guys on the field. Absolutely. And listen, I honestly think, and I may be in the minority here, but I think getting Ra Thomas back is also a big step because, you saw in some of those bigger games, whether it was the Ole Miss game or whether it was the Tennessee game, he makes a chunk play for Georgia. It seems like every game he's a 20+ yarder that's big, and it's usually early. He's a guy that does stuff for them. So I think that one's also really big. But yeah, I don't think Georgia's going to have 100% or I don't even know how close to 100% it'll be of Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers this Saturday. But I do believe both of them are going to give it a go. And the funny thing about Bowers is you're sitting down there, you're watching him in pregame warm-up against Georgia Tech, and he's just he looks like a stallion. He's gliding. He looks great, and then he doesn't play, and then Kirby's like state championship, and I'm kind of if this was Alabama today, I think he would have played. I think all of those guys would have last week.
Well, and the fact of the matter is they could win that game without them, and it does give some other guys a chance to
Sure.
be in a competitive situation. But now they're in the ultimate competitive situation. It's a strange deal the way the playoff scenarios work, because if Georgia loses, there's plenty of scenarios where they get in, but I think there's a chance they don't. So it does kind of feel backs against the wall at this point.
It does. And listen, if you've got a Louisville hat, throw it on. If you've got a Oklahoma State hat, I mean, those two teams losing would absolutely put Georgia in the playoff, win or lose. But I still think it's very important for Georgia to win this game. Georgia doesn't have any hump to get over. It doesn't have any mountain to climb. It's at the top of it. It's trying to create history. It's got the longest win streak in SEC history. But beating Alabama in that building is a box to check off. It doesn't mean that it doesn't take anything away from what Georgia has done the past 2 seasons that they don't. But they've had their hearts broken in that place, by Alabama, over and over and over 3 times. So it's Georgia needs to win this game, but ultimately there's ways for Georgia to get in. And I do think it's really funny. I don't know that I've ever heard a committee member come out or a committee chair come out and say it quite like it was said. We don't when the guy said on Tuesday, we've never said most deserving. It's the best.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody, and listen, I'm not one of these guys that's like, hey, I cover this team. They're infallible. They're not. I think Georgia's beatable. It wouldn't bother me if they got left out if they lose this game. But I don't think anybody can truly look at Georgia and say you're not one of the best 4 teams in the country.
Well, and that's
win or lose.
That's who they're talking about when they
that's
say
what
that.
I thought too. Yeah,
because that's the team they feel like can beat everybody else. Vegas would favor them over everybody else, that sort of thing. But this is a tricky matchup for Georgia. This is a team that let the Auburn quarterbacks run a little bit. Brady Cook gave them problems. Haynes King kept plays alive last week. And now you get Jalen Milroe, who, other than probably Jaden Daniels, is the most dynamic running quarterback in the country.
Yeah, 100%. And, if you look at the numbers, they'll lie to you a little bit, because you look at them and you're like, oh man, since they allowed 125 yards to Peyton Thorne and Robbie Ashford, Georgia's only their high is Brady Cook, 39 rushing yards, and he had 51 at the half. So Georgia kind of took him backwards
with some sacks,
in the second half with some sacks. But like you said, it's extending plays. And listen, when you've got a quarterback like Jalen Milroe, it's a tricky matchup for everybody. I mean, nobody really wants to deal with that. Alabama didn't want to deal with Jaden Daniels for that very reason. I mean, nobody really wants to have to deal with the guy that, oh man, you do every single thing right and you give up 17 yards. That's just tough. It's a very difficult spot to be in. And I think the key for Georgia in this game is, yeah, you want to limit Jalen Milroe, but you've got to be willing to say, all right, take the 15 and don't dump it over my head to the tight end for 40. That's kind of where Georgia's got to be. And listen, if Smile Munden is limited in this game, Georgia's going to have to play 2 true freshmen at inside linebacker. And so Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen are going to be running around out there having to make that decision. Not ideal.
Yeah, and it does seem like Jalen Milroe loves Amari Niblack. And he's
he does.
Very interesting target.
When he's on the move, he absolutely does. And that's something that they've got to kind of figure out.
Yeah. So what about this Alabama defense against Georgia's offense? Like we were talking about, it feels like if Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Ra Thomas, Dominic Lovett, Dejon Edwards, like it feels like there's so many options for Georgia. But what can Alabama do to limit that?
I think it starts with pass rush. I mean, Dallas Turner, Chris Braswell, Justin Boigbe. I mean, those guys, you're talking about 33 and a half tackles for loss there. And I think somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20 sacks. Georgia's in a tremendous pass protection team. You look at Georgia's past, let's see, I think it's in Georgia's past 27 games, they've given up a grand total of 19 sacks.
Wow.
So, there are teams that gave that up in 8 games this year or 5 games. So Georgia does protect the passer well, but I think it also comes down to, kind of complementary offense from down to down is stay ahead of the chains. Not that Georgia has to, or it's doomed. They're plenty good enough offense to overcome 2nd and 10, 3rd and 7, one of the best third down offenses in the country. But you stay ahead of the chains, you slow down that pass rush, you slow down the pass rush and give yourself some time against a very good Alabama secondary. But the one particular thing I'm looking at is if you watch Alabama, they're vulnerable kind of in that second level window of 10 to 12 yards, 10 to 20 yards. That's where Georgia is absolutely tremendous. Georgia, Carson Beck's averaging over 15 an attempt in that area.
That's where McConkey and Bowers feast.
Everybody really love it too. Dylan Bell, same way. It is Oscar Delp. Most of Georgia's receivers are at their best in that window of the defense, even the running back. So I think that's something that's going to be big in this game as well. And in order to get there, in order to allow those, crossing routes and over routes to kind of come to fruition, Georgia has to protect the passer, and that's not easy against Dallas Turner and his cohorts.
So you mentioned Tate Ratledge coming back. I'm trying to recall, has there been a moment when Tate and Amarius Mims were healthy in the second half of the season together?
Yeah, the Ole Miss game.
Okay,
for part of it. Yeah, for part of that. I guess the Ole Miss, he got hurt at Tennessee, so the Ole Miss game and part of the Tennessee game.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's probably the spot there. I mean, that's one of the things that is, if Georgia finds a way to win this game, goes on to win its third straight national championship. That's one, thing that Stacey Searle is going to pour a drink of some dark liquor of some kind. I bet sit in a recliner and just really think about kind of what happened for him this year, because Georgia has played 7-8 offensive linemen like regularly, and they really haven't missed a beat. Xavier Truss has played 4 positions, and so but getting Ratledge back and to anything sort of close to healthy is big because of how many big games he's played in at that particular position.
So the O-lineman who played for Stacey Searle is always talking about how you mess up in practice, he throws that hat.
Yeah.
Goes down at your feet. I don't know that he's throwing his hat very much for these guys, because they really are, and Ratledge is a veteran. Cedric Van Pran's a veteran. Mims has now played a lot of football. It feels like they just really know what they're doing at this point.
Yeah, they do. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and I compared it to the Minnesota Vikings when they had Randy Moss and Chris Carter. Georgia's offensive line is a Chris Carter. It's very reliable. It's very steady. It's tremendously good. It's not elite. It's not like, I don't think they're just, thumb up, thumb down guys and just blowing them off the ball every single snap. There have been probably better offensive lines in the history of college football, I'm almost certain, but they are incredibly consistent, incredibly good, and incredibly good at figuring it out. If a team's giving them trouble for a couple drives, they find a way, and I think that's something that may serve them well in a game like this.
Let's talk Carson Beck, because your colleague Rusty Mansell wrote something recently, I think it was this morning, that Carson Beck and his family are going to meet with Kirby Smart after this game about what his future holds, because he is one that the NFL people are looking at and saying, we may want him right now.
Yeah, he's had such a great season. And listen, I have a hard time, while I have heard throughout the season that the expectation is for him to come back, the further you got and the further good football he played, the less likely that became. Because you get to a point where there's nothing really left to prove, and risk versus maybe getting marginally better. Andy, if Georgia wins a national championship, I don't see it. I just
think he would go pro?
Yeah, I don't see him coming back. At that point, what do you do? He's not like Stetson, right? Stetson was never going to be a top 30 or even top 50 pick. Carson can be that, and that's life-changing money, like right out the gate. It can make what is it, like $3 or $4 million up front if you're the last pick of the first round. So I think that if Georgia wins one, but at the end of the day, he also has to kind of weigh, all right, I can make some change by staying at Georgia, get some NIL stuff. I'm sure Stetson made a ton of money in his last year. We don't know exactly how much. But you can stay and do that and then possibly make, generational wealth type stuff in 2025, or you can, go ahead and go. And honestly, you have to kind of weigh that whole idea of, hey, what if I go 24th overall? Well, you're probably going to a better situation than you would be if you're going first overall. You have a chance to win, but you wouldn't,
make that money
yourself up as well. So it's a balancing act. And listen, I'm sure that Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo and the guys on that staff Jonas Jennings are going to have some long conversations with Carson and his people kind of about what Georgia wants to do for him and what his options are.
Well, and Carson's from Jacksonville. He's been working with a team, since high school, but this group now is the group that trained Anthony Richardson. It's also the group that works with Brock Purdy. So they've got a couple of different perspectives on that. They've got the guy who went 4th in the draft after starting for one season in college. They got Mr. Irrelevant, who started for 4 years in college and is now a great starting quarterback in the NFL. So yeah, he'll have he'll have some interesting perspectives to kind of glean from as he figures that out. But it's interesting because I think if we'd have had this conversation 6 or 7 weeks ago, you and I saw the seeds of this, but I don't think most people would have been like, oh, definitely he should be considering the NFL. They would have been, are you crazy? Like, he's got to come back.
Yeah, and he's listen, he has surpassed my expectations of this year. I thought some folks coming into the year had pie in the sky hopes for him. I knew coming into the season, this guy's just now getting to know Mike Bobo. Bobo worked with tight ends last year. Buster Faulkner was with the quarterbacks for the last few years. I knew a lot of the mechanic stuff that he was going to be taught went from Bobo to Buster Faulkner, and he was going to learn a lot of the same stuff. But the relationship and you've seen it kind of blossom. You've seen them kind of think with the same mind in the red zone as Georgia's gotten better in the red zone as the year's gone along. You've seen them be so good on third down, and Carson's showing more mobility and more confidence and getting a little bit better with the deep ball. And listen, it's tough. It's a tough decision for him, and I would have a hard time not taking the bird in the hand. But I think a lot of it's going to depend on how he plays in this game. I really do. I mean, if he goes out there and kind of lays an egg, whether Georgia wins or loses, it's probably going to hurt his stock a little bit. But then he'll have a chance to, if they win, then he'll have a chance to kind of get back on top of that. But man, if he gets a chance to go out on top, it's hard to argue with that.
Well, and this is one that, like, Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl, he talks about games like this are the easiest for scouts because you're seeing pros against pros.
Right.
So it's the same thing with Carson Beck. This is Carson Beck playing behind an NFL offensive line, throwing to NFL receivers against an NFL secondary and an NFL pass rush.
Yeah, and he's faced some tests. He's faced some good teams and some tests, but this is by far the most talented defense he would have played this year. He's played, he's been rushed by James Pierce and that Missouri, group of monsters that they've got up front, and he's thrown against some good. I mean, Missouri's got some good DBs, and he's played some good players, but this one is different, and this is primetime action, and every eyeball and every college football fan eyeball in the world will be watching it. So
well, and I love the way you put it, because I hadn't thought about it this way, that Georgia has not beaten Alabama in Atlanta, and some of their greatest heartbreak, obviously second in 26, but I thought 2018 was probably more frustrating.
Yeah,
because they went into 17 not thinking, we definitely got this. That was very much a talk. They should have won the game in 2018. Like, they knocked 2 out of the game. They still lose. Like, this is kind of the last frontier of the things they haven't done.
Somebody mentioned on the Dog Walk, our message board over at DawgsHQ, that maybe Georgia hasn't beaten Alabama in Atlanta since the 1940s.
Wow. Yeah.
And, they lost to him in heartbreaking fashion in the Georgia Dome in 12. So that's another one. That 18 game, you're 100% right. And listen, Georgia kind of flipped the script in Lucas Oil for that one, because Alabama kind of dominated that game for most of the way, and Georgia just beat them badly in the fourth quarter, whereas Alabama beat Georgia badly in the fourth quarter of that 2018 game. So yeah, Georgia's got some demons to exercise, and got a chance to check off a box here and kind of get it going and win 2 in a row, maybe against the by my estimation, the greatest to ever do it, and will be for at least another 10 years.
Unless Kirby Smart passes it.
Kirby's got a chance, but I mean, he's still got, to me, in my mind, got a long way to go.
Yeah. Jake, so much fun. I will see you in Atlanta on Saturday.
I look forward to it, buddy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.